Hey everybody, what's going on? So today in this video we're going to be talking about how to fish a football jig in the wintertime. So as most of y'all know right now, it's cold. It's probably 30s, mid 30s right now here in southern Illinois, and it sucks, it really does, because you can't catch any fish and the deer aren't moving a whole lot, so you know, I can't exactly say the deer hunting is good right now. It's not really doing much. I haven't even seen a big buck yet, so I can't say that the deer hunting is doing real good. But it's like I always say, you'll never know if you would have caught a fish if you don't try. So that's what I'm out here to do today. I'm out here to try. And if I don't catch a fish, then oh well. If I do catch a fish, then cool. You know, that's something else that we can talk about real quick, especially you can use this in the wintertime, is don't come out fishing with the mindset that, oh, I'm going to go and I'm going to catch a 10-pounder, you know. Don't go out there with a mindset like that, because you do that, then when you don't catch a fish, you're disappointed. Go out there with the mindset of, I'm probably not going to catch a fish, but hey, I'm going to try. And if you do catch a fish, then you can be pleasantly surprised. So what I'm fishing here is little football, I think it's a 1/4 ounce football jig, peanut butter jelly color with a Cricket Brown, Docks Lure Company Cricket Brown mud bug as the trailer. And we're just going to throw this around. There's a brush pile out there where I just casted. We're going to mess around with that brush pile a little bit, see if we can get a fish off of it. And if we don't get a fish off of it, then we'll just start throwing around this ledge, and we'll just start throwing in random deep parts of the pond to see if we can run across a hungry bass. So the way I like to fish a football jig, especially in the wintertime, is just really slow hop it. Sometimes I won't even move the jig, I'll just let it kind of have a tight line, and every once in a while I'll just very slightly move that rod just to where that jig has a little bit of movement. Not a whole lot though, because you don't want to scare the fish. You know, that's something that a lot of people don't realize is in the wintertime. You know, something moving real fast and erratic looking, to the slower moving fish, you know, in the cold water down on the bottom, that'll scare them. And they'll think, daggum, there's some crazy looking thing over there. That's probably a fishing lure. I probably shouldn't bite that. But then, of course, you got the stupid ones that, like, oh, hey, here's some shiny, flashy purple thing. I want to eat it. You know, you got those stupid ones and you got the real smart ones. And usually in the wintertime, you're dealing with the real smart ones because the stupid ones are hiding. So you got to figure out how to get those smart ones to bite. How I usually get the smarter ones to bite, usually the smarter ones are the bigger ones. You know, usually you can get the smaller ones to bite, but the stupid ones are usually the smaller ones, but the big ones are smart. So you got to trick those big ones into biting. How you can do that is you just real slow move that bait, make it look like a little crawfish down there just hopping along the bottom. You know, and every once in a while you can give it a little hop. You know, give it a little pump up, straight up in the air. What that'll do is that'll look like a fleeing crawfish, and it'll get that fish's attention. You know, if that fish is 10, 20 feet away in real clear water, he's going to see that little bit of a slight movement. You know, when it pops up in the air like that, he's going to see that, and he's going to come over to investigate, because bass are naturally curious. You know, they get curious. You know, I think everybody in the world's heard this phrase, curiosity killed the cat. You know, curiosity catch the bass, you know. That bass gets curious, he comes over there, he sees this little crawfish bug sitting down there on the bottom. You just slowly move it real slow, and all of a sudden he just thumps it. You set the hook on him, and you reel him on in, and there you go. Some of the biggest fish ever caught was in the wintertime, throwing jigs and slow moving stuff like that. You know, one of the lakes, pretty much the top lake on my bucket list, besides Lake Fork, Lake Chickamauga down in Tennessee, the biggest fish ever caught out of that was caught back in 2015 in January with 6 inches of snow on the ground with an Alabama rig. Thought it was a fish, but it wasn't. It was a brush pile. Flip it right back out there and see if we can get that fish that I thought was biting to bite. But yeah, you know, 6 inches of snow on the ground with an Alabama rig, that's something else that you can throw to trigger fish, especially if you're a power fisherman. You know, me personally, I fish whatever gets bit. You know, I'm not a power fisherman or a finesse guy. I fish whatever gets me bit. You know, but there is some baits that I just hate to fish. You know, an Alabama rig is one of those baits. But hey, you know what? If I'm catching fish on it, I love it at that moment. But a jig is something you can catch small fish, big fish, and all fish on it. You can do anything with a jig. You can flip it, cast it, swim it. You can do just about anything with the jig. In my opinion, a jig and a swim bait are probably two of the most, if not the most, versatile baits in bass fishing, because you can take it, you know, especially if you pair them together. A jig and a swim bait, if you pair them suckers together, you can cast them out there, make it look like a little crawfish, bluegill, shad, shiner, crappie, other bass. You know, that's something else that some people may not know, that bass are cannibals. They will eat each other if the forage that they have, like shad, bluegill, crappie, all that, is low. You know, if they start getting real hungry, they'll start eating themselves. You know, I've seen pictures of 2-pound bass with 1-pound bass in their mouth. You know, you wouldn't think that a 2-pounder would eat a 1-pounder, but I tell you what, I've seen plenty of pictures of people holding 2-pounders with 1-pounders stuck in their throat. I'm sure you guys have seen those pictures of giant, like 8.5, 9-pound bass with them tilapias and crappie and stuff in their throat. Well, I've seen 2-pound bass with 1-pound bass stuck in their throat like that before, and you wouldn't think so. You wouldn't think that a bass would eat another bass, but they sure do. You know, anything will eat anything if they're hungry enough. That's like coyotes. They're a lot like coyotes in a way, because coyotes, they'll become cannibalistic if they're hungry enough. They'll eat each other. But bass are opportunistic fish. You know, if they see something sitting on the bottom like that, like this little jig right here, you know, they'll come over there and they'll pick it up and they'll play with it a little bit. And that's when you hook them in the face and reel them on in, take some pictures, and let them go. A lot of the time during the winter time, them fish don't want to move a whole lot because their metabolism is so slow that they may not even move. You know, sometimes they'll just sit in one spot and just sit there and not move for a long, long time. But hey, even if it's cold, they still got to eat. They're not just going to sit on the bottom and starve themselves to death. They still got to eat. That's how you trigger them. You know, you get that slow moving, super slow moving jig down there on the bottom, and that's how you can catch them fish, because they're like, oh, hey, there's a little crawfish. They come over there and they just slam that jig. You know, and that's something else, you know, how the fish bite. That can be very tricky to figure out during the winter time. You cast out that jig, you let it sit on the bottom, you hop it every once in a while, and all of a sudden it gets real heavy. You think it's grass, you start reeling it in, all of a sudden it starts fighting. There's a fish, you didn't know it was a fish, you thought it was a tree or a leaf or some crap like that. I've had that happen I don't know how many times. Especially with a jig-headed swim bait. I'll throw a jig-headed swim bait out there and I'll just be reeling along, and all of a sudden it'll get heavy, and I'm thinking, oh, okay, there's some grass, and I get it up here to the bank and there's a 4-pounder sitting on it. I didn't realize it. Y'all don't even understand how many 4-pounders I've lost doing that crap. It sucks, but it's happened before. You know, I sit there and I'm reeling in this little jig-headed swim bait. All of a sudden I get it about maybe 4 foot from my rod tip, get ready to bring the bait in so I can get the grass off of it. All of a sudden, a 4-pound bass comes up, jumps, spits the bait, and I'm sitting there, and I'm like, are you kidding me? You know, and that's happened to me many, many times, and it hurts sometimes, because especially on those days where they just not biting, like on the winter time. You know, during the winter time, it's hard to get a bite. You know, something that my cousin said, he says this all the time to me. You know, if you have a doubt, set the hook. You know, if you think it's a fish, set the hook. If it's not a fish, oh well. You know, especially if you're on a place where there's some big fish, because I've had a lot of that freaking semi over there making all that freaking racket. But I've had some big bass come up, just barely even touch the bait, and I'm thinking it's not a fish, it's a piece of grass or some crap like that, and then they come off right at the bank. It sucks. It's happened to me plenty of times. Trust me, I'm sure anybody who's bass fished for any amount of time, you know, they've had that kind of stuff happen to them, especially when they were younger and they were first starting to bass fish. I tell you what, one of the first times I ever started throwing a swim bait, jig-headed swim bait, cast it out there and was reeling across this grass flat where I'd caught thousands of fish before. Was thinking, okay, got some grass on it or something, because I was throwing a jig head above a grass flat. I thought, okay, maybe I'm just on a little bit up, a little bit more up in the air, up in the water column grass. Started reeling her in, and there's a 4.5 pounder on it, and I didn't realize it until it got all the way up to the bank and popped off. Man, that freaking burned me. So now, if I feel something that I think might have been a bite, it could have been grass or whatever, I'll just set the hook on it. That's how I've caught a lot of 3-pounders before. A lot of them big stick bass. I've caught a lot of them doing that. Okay, we over here by the deeper water now. We're going to start throwing to this brush pile from a different angle. That's something else you can do. If you got a boat, or if you got a little bit of a longer bank that you can fish, if you got one brush pile out in the deeper water and you think there's something, nope. Thought it was a fish, but it wasn't. But if you can get to a different side of the brush pile, definitely go to the different side of the brush pile, especially if you caught some fish off that brush pile. You know, if I'm going over there, if I'm standing over there and I catch 2 fish off this brush pile, what I'll do almost every time is, even though I'm catching fish while I'm standing over there, I'll come over here, I'll cast that brush pile, and it gets them a different look. You know, it looks like, oh hey, here's a different shad. It's not the same shad that Ricky and Jimmy just got caught by. So here comes this little swim bait or something, little jig or whatever, coming down a different alley. Ricky and Jimmy done learned their lesson, so they're not going to bite something like that. But Billy Bob over here comes out and just slams it because he's thinking it's not the same thing that Ricky and Jimmy got bit by. And there you go. You catch Billy Bob. You catch Billy Bob the bass. But yeah, I love taking a jig, pairing it up with a swim bait. In my opinion, swim baits are better than crawl trailers for a jig, especially football jigs. A lot of people will look over a swim bait for a jig trailer, especially football jig trailer, because they're thinking, oh, it's imitating the crawfish. I tell you what, I've caught tons of bass throwing football jigs with swim bait trailers. One of the biggest bass I caught this year was on a it was on a green pumpkin purple football jig with a green pumpkin magic 3.5 gunner on it. There was a brush pile. I ran into that brush pile down there. But a lot of people don't know that a swim bait can work just as good, if not better, than a normal little crawl trailer. And something I love to do with a swim bait and a jig is I absolutely love to flip deep cover with it. If this tree right here was sitting right out here and it was 20 foot of water, what I'll do is I won't throw this crawl jig. I'll cut that off immediately. I'll pick up that green pumpkin purple jig with that green pumpkin magic swim bait that Doc's Lure Company makes. I'll take it and I'll flip it right up next to that jig and I'll just let it free fall. I'll pull as much line as I need to out like that right there. I'll just let it free fall. I'll just let it fall and keep following, and I'll watch my line, and all of a sudden if my line shoots to the right or left or middle or whatever, I'll set the hook on the fish. I've caught so many fish doing that with a little green pumpkin swim bait, because what it does is as that jig is sitting there falling, that swim bait tail is going like this as it's falling, makes it look like a dying shad, bluegill, crawfish, frog, whatever could have fallen off that tree. You know, who knows, maybe there's a dying bird sitting up on that tree and all of a sudden it falls in the water. 8-pound bass is sitting there. Ain't no 8-pound bass in the world going to pass up an easy meal like a dead bird. That bird come flying down there and it's actually a jig just sitting there kicking back and forth, and all of a sudden, wham! 8-pounder hits it, you set the hook, and there you go. Giant fish in the boat. Something else in the wintertime that I like to do with jigs, especially football jigs and finesse jigs, is I don't like to use the heavier hook jigs. Heavier weight jigs with lighter hooks, in my opinion, are the best. A lot of people have different opinions about that. A lot of people think you have to have a bigger hook in the jig to get that real good hook set. You know, they ain't gonna come off with that big barb. in my opinion, I think if you go with a lighter hook with a heavier jig, you know, like this one here, this is a 1/4 ounce with about a 2-3/0 hook. Go ahead and pull it up here and I'll show it to you. That's about a 2/0 hook. Y'all can see that right there. It's a very thin wire hook, but it's a quarter ounce jig. I like that heavier weight with that lighter hook. Reason why is because I can use stuff like this because it's a heavier weight, but I wouldn't use anything heavier than this with a 1/4 ounce jig. You know, if I'm using something a little bit lighter, like an 1/8 ounce, I'll go with a spinning rod just because it's a little bit easier to maneuver that bait, pitch it where you want it to, and everything else. But with a 1/4 ounce jig, I can take it, I can hit just about any target y'all want me to, I can hit it. But, you know, with a lighter hook, the reason why I like using a lighter hook, especially in the wintertime. Summertime, I'll go with a big hook. The biggest hook I can buy, I'll put it on a jig, and I'll cast it out there and I'll use it. You know, if I can get a jig with a 6/0 hook, thought that was a fish, but it wasn't. You know, if I can get a 6/0 hook and a 1/4 ounce jig, you can bet I'm going to be throwing it with a big old crawl trailer, Jungle Hog by Doc Lure Company, or a Finesse Hog by Doc Lure Company. I'm going to be throwing a bigger bait, a bigger jig, with a bigger hook. The reason why is because in the wintertime, you have to drive that little bitty point, because if you think about it, when that water gets real hard, gets cold, you know, when it freezes, that fish's lips are going to get real tough. They're going to be real hard to get a hook into. You know, I've had fish one time. I'll tell you what, I had a fish. I think that was back in November 2016. That was 6 days before I killed my 12-point buck with my bow. I went out 6 or 7 days. Can't really remember exactly. The weekend before I killed my big buck, I went out with my mom and dad and brother, and we were throwing a bunch of different baits, and I ended up starting to throw a Strike King Sexy Dog. In the middle of November, I was throwing a walking bait. I actually caught 2 fish, one of the biggest fish of the year I caught on that bait that time. And something that I thought was really interesting was as I lipped that fish, them hooks basically fell out. There was no holes or nothing in that fish's lips. Basically, the only thing that was keeping that fish pinned was the pressure that I was keeping on the bait to hold that fish. That fish wasn't even really hooked. I mean, if that fish wanted to fight a little bit harder, and I'd say if he would have jumped one good time, he probably would have spit that bait real easy. That's why in the wintertime, you want to use something that has a lighter hook, and you want to give it a good hook set. You know, I'm not saying, you know, give it that Major League Fishing flipping hook set, you know, like Greg Hackney does when he's flipping heavy grass. I'm not saying that, but you want to give it a good hook set, because if you don't give it a good hook set, you're probably going to just barely skin hook that fish, and the pressure is all that's going to be there. And especially with a jig, you know, now with a jerk bait or a top water or a crankbait, something that has multiple hooks, you can do it, and you don't have to set the hook super duper hard with it. But with a single hook bait like a Texas rig or a jig, you definitely want to give it that little bit of an extra oomph in that hook set, because if you don't, that single hook may not be able to keep that fish pinned, and you get into a big fish, you know, you get into a real bad jumping fish, then you're going to lose that fish of a lifetime if you don't get that good hook set. I don't know how many fish I've lost because I made a bad hook set. You know, there was one time I was fishing a, that was back when I first started fishing a white jig with a little swim bait on it. I was throwing the Strike King Sexy, or no, Strike King White Shad swim jig is what I was throwing. I got brush pile, so I guess I'm just going to set the hook into it and pull it in. That came out. There you go. All good. Didn't bend the hook or nothing. Throwing a Strike King Hack Attack heavy cover swim jig with a 4-inch Doc Lure Company swim bait. And I was reeling it in. This was the first time I ever used it. The first fish of this year, 2018, was caught on a white swim jig by Strike King. Same one, same trailer and everything. But 2 casts before that, or actually I think it was 2 casts after that, I had a fish. He came up, he bit it, because this was cold water. I'm talking probably mid-40s like it is right now. And, you know, this was late spring, you know, this was middle of March. That's what time it was. It was about middle of March. And I was sitting there and I was swimming it back to me. And all of a sudden, just felt this little thump, and I didn't get the good hook set. I kind of reeled up and, you know, very lightly set the hook into him. I didn't think it was all that big. I really didn't even think it was a fish because of the grass that was in that pond. So I just kind of very lightly kind of brushed up into the fish, and as I was reeling the fish in, I wasn't really trying to horse him a whole lot. I got him up to about right there where that jig is, right about there, and popped off about a 2.5 pounder. So I switched over to a bluegill colored one, and I ended up catching a second fish and having a couple more fish on as well. So, you know, a lot of people may not think that the hook set matters as much as it does, but I tell you what, in the wintertime, especially the wintertime, now in the summertime where water's warmer, that fish's mouth is a little bit softer. You can get that bigger hook, or that, there's a fish. Thought it was a fish. I really did think it was a fish. Might have been though. Don't know. That fish's skin is a little bit softer. You can get that bigger hook into him. You get that lighter hook into him as well. And you can get them hooks into him, and you can set it hard. You got to set it hard sometimes, but sometimes you don't. Sometimes you can just reel into them, and they'll be hooked. They'll be pinned pretty good. So I hope y'all like this video. I hope y'all understood some of the stuff that I was saying. But it's pretty cold out here. Getting ready to go hunting here pretty soon. Pretty excited to go hunting. I think I'm going to have a pretty good day. Going to a stand that I've had some pretty good luck in. Seen one of the biggest bucks I've ever seen out of this stand. So, and it was about 2 years ago. The 20th, it'll be 2 years ago. So, pretty excited about going to this stand. I think I might see some rutting activity. I hope I will anyway. So, thank y'all for watching. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. Share this video on any of your social medias. Help me get to 1,000 subscribers. I'll be doing a huge giveaway of all Doc's Lure Company baits. And, yeah, thank y'all for watching. Bye.